Welcome back. Today I'm showing you how to make championship quality ribs in your own backyard using only a Weber kettle. Let's get started. I've got about a 3.5 pound rack of St. Louis cut spare ribs. There's very minimal work to do here, but there are some things that we can do so that we can make sure that we have the best and the most consistent cook possible. Once you get your pork ribs out of the cryovac, just flip them over. On the back of the ribs here, you'll see there's a couple of things you want to pay attention to. One, there's this shiny membrane that's on the back. We're going to get rid of a little bit of that. And then the second is this big old brisket, or piece of what we call the brisket. And this is where these ribs were attached to the diaphragm. We're going to take a sharp knife and we're just going to trim that right down to the bone, getting rid of that just like so. I'm always trying to make sure you guys know what tools I'm using and what tools I love to use. The next thing you use is just a boning knife. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the bottom part of this membrane, but I'm going to leave a little bit of the membrane on the top. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I anticipate that we might have a little bit of a hot spot in our Weber kettle while we're cooking, and I don't want to lose any of the bones. Remember, I'm teaching you how to make championship quality ribs in your own backyard using the Weber kettle, which means the tenderness is going to be perfect, which means the bones should not be falling out of the ribs. So we're going to start by just scoring that, and I'm just running about an inch from the top of those, and I'm just running my knife all the way down, just like so. So now I've got a nice little piece of tape to hold the top of those bones in, so if it gets a little bit hot in there, I won't be too concerned about those bones blowing out and not holding on, so that we can have our championship quality ribs. So I'm going to take off that membrane. So I just grabbed a sheet of paper towel here, and I'm going to pull that membrane back all the way across the first bone. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck when they're trying to make ribs, is getting this membrane off, and they get frustrated because it comes off in pieces. But if you pull that piece of membrane all the way across that first bone there, so that you have a nice little flap here, you can grab that with a paper towel, and then you can rip it off nice and easy. Of course not nice and easy, because this is YouTube and it would be too simple if I got it in the first run. Let's try and get the rest of that out of there. Perfect. So you can see we got our membrane out of that rib. You might be asking yourself, David, well, what if I left the membrane in my rib? Well, have you ever been somewhere and you bitten into a rib and it's got a little bit of snappiness on the back? That's because those membranes aren't removed. And a lot of restaurants, they'll score it, which will help it break down a little bit, but you'll still get bites of that sometimes. If you're cooking at home, if you're gonna take this again to cook competition barbecue, you wanna make sure that you remove that membrane so that you get a nice, even, juicy, just the best bite of rib that you've ever had. Got our membrane removed. There's a little bit of extra fat that's just under that membrane here, right? And I'm just gonna clean up that using our boning knife. Just run that right along there. And I'm being very careful that I'm not cutting into the bones or exposing that. Just kind of getting rid of a little bit of that extra fat that's on there. And I'm pretty happy with that. I would maybe get a little bit off down here and a little bit right there. Let's flip our ribs over and talk about the front side. This, I can tell you, is gonna be a little bit too long for our Weber kettle, so we're gonna have to trim it down a little bit. Or if you were using a rib rack, you could probably just cook the whole thing just like this and you'd be just fine. I don't have a rib rack. I'm only cooking this one rack, so we're gonna clean it up just a little bit so that it fits nicely on the Weber kettle and things cook nice and even. I'm just gonna use my knife here, find where that last bone ends, which is just right here. And I'm just gonna follow that just right down. So I'm just gonna square that off just like so. Over here on this end, you can feel that that's just a lot of cartilage. You're likely gonna burn where that last bone is right there on the end. And I'm gonna use our knife and I'm just gonna go straight down just like that. So this is looking pretty good. You can see on this rack though, we have some big fat deposits that are right here on the top of this rack. And fortunately, what that means is that's probably likely not gonna break down in the smoker very nicely. So that's not gonna be an enjoyable bite just down towards the bottom of that rib. So we can take a little extra step here, clean that up just a little bit. So all I'm gonna do is just take my knife and just kind of slide it right underneath of that fat. And you can see that there's some beautiful marbling underneath that fat, and that's gonna make for a nice, enjoyable bite in about 3 hours. And look, here we go. We're just gonna do the same thing there. And we're gonna do the same thing just down here on this end. Let's go ahead and clean that out there. And that's looking absolutely perfect. There we go. All right, so the last thing that you could do, and I'm gonna do this step, but it's completely optional, and it's because the competition guy in me can't let it go. But I'm gonna clean up the top edge of this rib here, just to expose that so that those are all bones and I don't have any cartilage in there, just so that it looks nice and pretty, so that you guys hopefully hit that subscribe button and come back again to see what else we're cooking. Before we make that cut, is we want to find that spot where in the bone, there's a little bit of cartilage that's between the top of this rack of ribs and that bone right there, right? And I can feel that that's just right in there, right? So I'm going to come over about 3 bones from the end, 1, 2, 3, put my finger in there. I can see that that's right down in there. And I'm just going to draw my knife straight across to one side, just like so. And that looks awesome, right? So I've got a nice squared up. But what we're going for here, you can see I've removed that bone, and then there's just a little bit of cartilage that's just showing over the top there, right? So that looks good enough for me. And there's our rack of ribs ready for rub. All right, so let's talk about rub. What rub should you use on your pork ribs? And the simple answer is use whatever you feel like. If you got something that you love that's just in your pantry that your family makes that's been used on your ribs, use it, enjoy it, love it. Barbecue is all about trying new flavors, doing what you love, and making sure that you're having a good time and you're sharing good food with people that you love. So today, I am actually using a rub that I haven't used before. This is called Barking Pig Smokehouse Barbecue. It's made right here in Minnesota, northern Minnesota. This says Glenwood, Minnesota. But it's a pork rub. It's got a sweet heat, so it's got a little bit of sweet and a little bit of heat to it, which is what I like in my ribs. So I'm just gonna get this guy open here. And this isn't in a shaker, so we're gonna go find one and get it into it. All right, so I'm back with a shaker. Being a barbecue guy, I usually have lots of empty ones rolling around, or at least 2, a couple I can marry because one's a little low. You know how it goes. But anyway, let's fill this bad boy up. Should actually sneak a taste of that and see what you think. Definitely got a lot of cayenne to it. Tastes like it's got a little fennel in there too as well. Some sugar, definitely some celery seed. Let's just give it a shot. This is the important part, and if there's one thing that I want you to remember from this video, maybe this, but hopefully you're taking notes so you can write all of it down. And of course you hit that subscribe button so you can come back later if you need to. So I'm just gonna come over and I'm gonna lightly coat the back of this rib with what we call in the business a medium coat. But what that means is basically I'm gonna be able to see the meat through the rub on the back, and that'll be just perfect. So we're just gonna go ahead and throw a little bit of this down. Boom, and there it is. So that's all that we need. This is a little bit of a finer grain rub, and you can see that there's some big pepper flake in there and some big sugar and things in there. You'll also probably wonder, whoa, wait a minute, you didn't put any binders down. But I'm here to tell you that if you let your meat sit on the counter for just a few minutes, about 15 or so, that this will tack up really nicely. It will set really nicely. The color will come in, and you don't need to worry about applying any binder to your meat. At least I don't apply any binder to your meat. But if you want to put mustard on there, Worcestershire sauce, mayo, mustard, I don't know what all the crazy YouTube kids is doing this day, but I'm telling you, you don't need it. You just put your rub on there, let it go do something else for 15 minutes, come back, and then we'll season up the other side. Our ribs have set up really nicely on the back. You can see that those spices have rehydrated and that they have begun to deepen in color. Let's go ahead, flip them over, and season the other side. So again, we're doing the same application. Just a nice medium coat. We don't want to bury the ribs. We want to make sure that we can certainly taste that porky flavor. We got the top season. It was as easy as that to get our rack of ribs ready for the Weber. We're gonna let these hang out here for 15 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get them on the smoker. All right, so our ribs are set out on the counter for 15 minutes. You can see that they are nice, they are dark, they are juicy. Those spices have rehydrated on the top. No binder needed. All that's left to do is just get these out on the smoker. So it's time to get our ribs on the Weber. Hopefully you caught our last video where I showed you how to set it up, and you can know that I got everything settled in at 275. One thing that I did not do in that video was add any wood. And I wanted to save that discussion for right now, just to let you know that there's no need to soak any wood and that you don't need a lot of it. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of backyard barbecue guys make is that they over smoke their food. And if you use smaller chunks of a hard wood, I like a hickory or a pecan, you'll turn out quality food every time. We're gonna add those chunks directly to the slow and sear side of the grill. And I like to put one where the fire is, and I like to put the other one just a little bit back towards the back, so that way we get some residual heat as things continue cooking. All right, now that we've got our wood on there, we'll let that sit for just a few minutes and then we'll go ahead and put our ribs on. So let's get these on here. In the last video, you also noticed that I set up a temperature probe. I'm gonna lay the rack of ribs right there next to that temp probe. Just push them together a little bit so that you get some nice peaks and valleys in there, and make sure that they're nice and even and that they're evenly spaced across from everything. And we're gonna let them hang out here for 40 minutes. We'll check back with you in just a few. We've had our ribs on here for right at an hour. Temps have been holding despite the little bit of snow we're finally getting here in Minnesota. Let's check and see how our ribs are doing. And they are looking fantastic. I'm really happy with that. You can see that if we do the touch test here, that our bark is starting to set up really nicely. We have a little bit coming off on our finger. I just want to even out the cook a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this rack over. Now I've got the bones pointed towards the fire. We're still hanging out about 275. We're gonna let these rock for probably about another 20 minutes. And then we're gonna go ahead and wrap them up with a little bit of apple juice and some other special things. But be sure to stick around. About an hour and 20 minutes that we've had our ribs on. I went ahead and put on cotton gloves with nitros over the top. These are way better than Tom. Take these off, take them inside, and I'll show you how we're gonna wrap them up. And they're gonna cook for about another 40 minutes after we put them back on the grill. I just want to take a second here to appreciate that nice mahogany color. This rub has a little bit of a bigger chunk in it than I would normally like, but they still look pretty good. I'm excited to get into them and try them, but this is exactly what we're going for. Again, just to cover what we went through already, you can see that we've got a nice rub that's set up out here. When I touch my finger to the top of it, it's not coming off on my finger, which means that they're ready to wrap. And it's also got a nice mahogany color. So as a backyard cook, two things that you want to go for this stage is that you want to make sure that your rub is set up really nicely, it's not coming off on your finger, and that you've got a nice mahogany color. And I've got 2 sheets of aluminum foil here that I've overlapped. I'm going to use a little bit of apple juice today, just about 2 ounces and out. Just about 1 ounce to 2 ounces of it. I'm going to use some honey, and you can put whatever else you like in your wrap too as well. Some guys use butter, some guys use a little bit of a vinegar sauce, and actually I think I have a vinegar sauce, so I'm going to go run and grab that and we'll wrap this up. Put a little bit of honey on the wrap on the bottoms, and this is where the rib's going to sit right on top of that honey. The other thing I've got here is just a half a stick of unsalted butter that I've cut the long way. I'm going to put that down on there, put our ribs down. We're going to put our ribs so that the bone side is facing up. So this is the same way that we took them off. And if you pay close attention to your ribs here, I'll turn these around so you can see it a little bit better. You can see that we're beginning to get a little bit of pullback around the back of the bones, which looks really nicely. But when these are done and they're properly cooked, we should have a nice cowboy tooth at the bottom of that rib there. Bring the top of this over and bring the other side to it. We're just going to roll that down on top just like so. Just going to roll up those sides there. And we've got a nice little packet here, and we're just going to spin that around so you can see it. What we're going to do is we're just going to pour our liquids right down in there. An ounce of apple juice. That's pretty good. Easy does it. And then we're going to put in about 1 ounce of the vinegar sauce. And you can find a vinegar sauce just about anywhere. Blues Hog makes one that's pretty popular. My buddies over at Real Man Meat Barbecue make another one that's pretty good called Tangy Tennessee. This is actually a special batch that I believe I'm the only one with. But we're going to give it a shot today, see what we like it. And I'm just going to put a splash, just a splash of that in there. So not too much. But we've got that all filled up, and we're just going to roll the end of that packet up there and make a nice little package. Now that we got our ribs wrapped up, it's time to get them back on the grill. This process will take anywhere from about 40 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of the rack of ribs that you have. But don't you worry, I'll teach you just what you need to know to tell when they are going to be absolutely perfect. I got our ribs, we're back out here at the Weber. We're going to put those right back where we got them from. Put the lid back on. We're going to make sure that we're keeping our Weber at 275 degrees. 5-degree variations in temperature from side to side at 280, 270. Those aren't really going to make much of a difference in the cook. But large swings by like 10, 20 degrees, those are significantly going to affect how long it takes your product to finish, and also the finished product itself. So make sure that you're keeping a close eye on your thermometer gauge, and that you're keeping it as close to 275 as possible without spinning it around too much, and I promise you'll have good results. We're going to let these hang out here for about 40 minutes, and then we'll come back and check them for tenderness and see if they're ready for sauce. so it's been 40 minutes. We're gonna get in and take a look at our ribs here and see how we're doing for tenderness. For this step, you are going to need an inch-degree thermometer, not for the temperature. We're using it to see if we can feel how tender our ribs are. There's also a couple of more signs other than the probe that you can look for to see if your ribs are tender. Some of those signs are going to include pullback on the rib bones and the bounce of the ribs themselves. And admittedly, those things are pretty hard to teach over video, but if you were lucky enough to attend one of my barbecue classes, I think you've got a pretty good handle on this. All right, so let's take a look here and see how we're doing. So you can, of course, see that we have begun to get a little bit of pullback on the bones, which is nice to see. If we flip them over, you can see they kind of still have a little bit of bounce to them. What I want is for that rib to just kind of fall down and lay flat, right? So we still need a bit more time there. And the last thing that you can do is just take a little gauge right between the middle of one of the bones here. You want it to go in and pull out with little to no resistance. And I can see that this still has quite a bit of resistance in there, so it's going to be a little bit more time until we're ready to take these off. But notice I did flip those over, so now we are meat side up. What we're doing here is, by flipping those, is making sure that we're evenly cooking both sides of the racks of ribs, so we get a nice, consistent, even bite, which is one of the things that sets championship barbecue apart from regular barbecue. So we got plenty of fuel here. The fire is looking great. I probably ought to, it actually looks like I need to turn that down just a little bit and make a couple of adjustments. Hopefully you've been doing that as you've been cooking today, just keeping an eye on your temperature, keeping it as close to 275 as possible. I'm going to turn mine down. We're going to come back in and check these in 20 minutes. And at that time, we will be about an hour into wrapping these guys. And we're going to want to check them frequently because they'll go pretty quickly once we get them flipped over in the wrap. Today, we've been on an adventure to create championship quality ribs on a Weber Kettle in our backyard. And I think we did it. We've taken our ribs off and we're gonna let them sit here on the counter. I'm just gonna open them up just a little bit to let some of that heat vent off because I think that the temperature is perfect. I don't want to overcook our ribs, and they will continue to cook if you let all of that heat in there. So let these sit here for a few minutes. I'm gonna go find some barbecue sauce to warm up so that we can slather on the top of these, and then we'll be ready to enjoy them after another quick spin on the Weber Kettle. So we let our ribs rest for just a few minutes. We're just gonna brush a little bit of sauce here on the back. I'm just using my favorite barbecue sauce. If you're curious what I'm using, go ahead and leave me a message and I'll let you know. Now that we've got the backs done, we're gonna flip them over. And we're gonna paint just a little sauce on the top as well. And we're not burying them in sauce, which is why I'm using a paintbrush. We're just putting a nice little light glaze on them to give them a little color and of course add a little bit more flavor back to them. Now we're gonna get these back onto the smoker for about 3 to 5 minutes, just for that sauce to tack up a little bit, and we'll be ready to dig in. Right, so it's been a few minutes. We've got our ribs out on the smoker. They look absolutely delicious. The sauce is nice and tacky on the top of them. How about we get them out and get them sliced up? And I like to slice bone away from me, and I always like to use a nice 12-inch slicer, which makes easy work of this. And I'm just slowly drawing my knife back between each bone. If you've cooked these properly, they should slice just like butter with little to no resistance. Sometimes you end up hitting a little bone there, but that's okay. Let's get them flipped over here and take a look at how we did. I mean, the aroma's coming off of these, the smell's coming from these. They look absolutely delicious. That little guy popped out. Now for competition, I'd usually pick only 4 bones. I usually cook 3 racks. I pick 4 bones from the middle of the rack and select the best tasting ones, the most tender ones, and I put them in the box and turn them in, and hopefully hit payday. But today we're just at home and we're just gonna enjoy these. But I wanna take a minute just to show you guys how juicy that rib is. Nice and juicy, nice and tender. Let's take a bite, see how we did. And that's a perfect rib bite. You can see the bone is dry, a bit through, it didn't fall off, it's still holding on to the rest of the bone itself. It's not as punchy as I would like. I think that the rub that we used today probably didn't have enough salt to it, which is one thing in competition barbecue, is that you want to make sure that you have enough salt for your food. because you gotta remember the judges are tasting lots of other food as well. But for at home, these are perfectly tender, absolutely delicious, great eating ribs, and you can now have championship quality ribs right in your own backyard. Be sure you hit that subscribe button if you like this video, and stay tuned. Next up, we're cooking chicken. I mean, I'd say that's pretty good.